Hello and welcome to our Trustees Week webinar looking at lived experience on boards. My name's Tracy Bird and I run the SCVO Information Service. Thanks to you all for joining us today, and just to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available later on the SCVO website. This Good Governance webinar is sponsored by Aberdeen Capital Limited, and I wanted to highlight a charities webinar they are running on the 25th of November, which will reflect on COP26, climate change and biodiversity. Booking details are on these slides, and we'll also send them out to you after this webinar, along with other resources from today. So, Trustees Week is all about celebrating the work of trustees and the role they play in governing our organisations. SCVO is focusing on board diversity and recruitment during this week, because effective boards need trustees with a wide mix of skills, experience and backgrounds. Diversity in all its forms strengthens your decision-making as a board, bringing new perspectives and informed voices. But often our boards don't reflect the communities we serve, and with only 8% of trustees being non-white, 36% women and 0.5% aged 18 to 24. And that really means our sector is losing out on diverse talent, knowledge and experience, which could affect decision-making and future sustainability. So that's why I'm delighted to have with us today Caroline Copeman, who is leading work on exploring the benefits and the barriers of having trustees with lived experience on boards. We also have Megan Moffat, Shruti Jain and Michael McLennan, and they are already proactive in recruiting trustees with experience of the issues their charity works on, or are trustees with lived experience themselves. They will be telling you their stories. Just before I hand over to Caroline, I'd just like to get a sense of where you're at right now with regard to board diversity. We've got a quick poll that I'd just like you to quickly answer, and it's really, how diverse is your board? And I want you to think about diversity in all its forms, thought, background and experience, as well as protected characteristics. So somewhere in the middle, 90% most people. Oh, that's going up, which is promising. Few people not diverse at all. And we've got one person's got a really diverse board. So hopefully they'll give us some comments as we go on. Share their tips for that. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Great. Do post your questions in the Q&A facility as we go, and we'll have time at the end to look at these. And if you've got any comments on what you're doing on your boards, put them in the chat as well. Thank you. And now over to you, Caroline.
Tracy, thanks so much. Really great to be here with you. I hope we've got an action-packed 40 minutes or so. We're leaving some time at the end for you to ask questions, as Tracy has just said. I'm going to share my screen. I promise you, this is not somebody from a business school, though I am from a business school, who's going to bombard you with masses of theory. I've got a tiny bit, because I thought it was my duty to give you a tiny bit. But I'm going to share my screen now and just give you a bit of an overview about how we're going to play the next short while. So we're going to talk about lived experience and charity boards. And there will be a big focus on the what it is, what we mean by it, and the why, and a little bit on the how. As I've said, a tiny bit of theory and 3 great case studies from Shruti, Megan and Michael, who are going to talk about their experiences. I'm also, though, really keen that we get a sense of your experiences too. And we're going to use chat to do that, to get your ideas. After each of the speakers have spoken, I'm going to ask you a question and get you to put your thoughts and your reflections in chat. And what SCVO will do is when they send you my slides, which they've said they'll do, and they will also send a copy of what's in chat, tart it up a bit, because chat is not necessarily as good as it could be in terms of a comms vehicle. And what you'll get then is both the recording, my notes, and also your thoughts, your combined thoughts about this really important topic. And I was really delighted to be asked to lead this session by Tracy, because it's so important to our sector. So as Tracy has said, use Q&A to note down your questions, and we're going to leave 20 minutes, 15 minutes for your questions at the end. So because we're certain that Shruti, Megan and Michael will be able to comment on and help you with your thinking around your practice with lived experience. So very quickly, we have quite a big focus on lived experience at the centre. I work for the Centre for Charity Effectiveness, which is part of Bayes Business School, formerly known as CAS, which is part of City University. And we've had a governance and strategy practice at the centre for about 20 years now. And we do quite a lot of governance reviews. We produce lots of material and resources. And about 18 months ago, we started doing some work on lived experience because we felt that we were seeing great changes in our sector, a lot more thought being given to diversity, equity and inclusion, great work being done by lots of people around improving governance, particularly around board behaviours. I know SCVO have done quite a lot of work on this. You have a great governance code through the OSCR. And also lots of work done, particularly through those codes, on service user involvement in our charities. But at the intersection of all of that is the topic of lived experience. And we found that there wasn't really very much that had been written around good practice. So, excuse me, we ran a series of seminars and we produced a web resource, which is the link is there, and you'll get that when you get my slides, or you can Google it. We've got this web resource, which is ever evolving, and it's got insights and case studies and numerous links to other materials that others have produced. In fact, others who've SCVO have had, I know, doing talks through the week this week. We think it's really important because when we do governance reviews and we do board observations, we see a lot of groupthink. We see a lot of boards that look and feel and sound the same. People who are not really stretching each other to get new and different insights to improve their decision making. And so that was our particular focus, but also with the added focus on diversity and inclusion on our charity boards. We were being asked by our consultancy clients if there was any good practice, if there were any top tips on how to do it. So we thought it would be really good to, and we got a bit of funding to produce this web resource. What I thought I'd do now is this is my theory sandwich. So right in the middle of my 5 minutes, or maybe slightly longer, I just thought I'd give you a bit of theory about decision making, because this really is what motivated us to think about encouraging organisations to think about lived experience. And when we talk about lived experience, what we're talking about is lived experience of the cause or the issue that your organisation exists to work on. It's definitely the case, the theory tells us, that groups of individuals make better decisions than one person on their own, because nobody can have the breadth of insight required to make a high quality decision. And we know, again, from research and also from our observations, that group decision making works best when you've got all of the perspectives relevant to the topic, including, therefore, lived experience of the cause and the issue. When you've got all of those perspectives in the room, when you have people who think differently in the room, and where all of those different experiences are encouraged to shine, are valued, are brought out in the room. So that's two bits of theory that I think are really important and really underline and reinforce the importance of thinking about lived experience on charity boards. But there is also this warning in the theory, and that groups, however diverse they are to start with, have a tendency to become more similar over time. You develop habits, you get used to each other. You know who's going to challenge what. There's always one who will always pick on something. You get used to that vibe, and you can gravitate towards shared blind spots. And there's a lot about this in our web resource, and a lot of examples of what organizations are doing to overcome it. But not only do you need to actively recruit people with diverse lived and learned experience, but you also need to create the conditions for this to flourish. And there's an onus on all of us as trustees to do this, to try and stimulate diverse thinking, divergent thinking, so opening up thinking by consciously working to include others. Certainly by avoiding tokenism. Every one of us on boards designing to create a positive dynamic. I was doing an observation, a board observation yesterday, and the chair, with every positive motivation, every time somebody made a staff member, for example, made a presentation, he said what his views were every time. So about 5 times he opened the discussion by saying, this is what I think. And what that did with this board, because there was not much challenge around in the room, was that everybody else then stayed quiet, or just a few people, and they were always the same 2 or 3, had something to say, but it wasn't challenging his thinking. And what that meant was that everybody was as opposed to thinking in a divergent way, they were all converging on an agreed echo chamber, as they call them in the trade. I think the other thing that we can all do as trustees is respond well when somebody does challenge our ideas and our thinking. And in that way, we create an environment where we can learn from each other. I think the final point on this slide is really important, and I expand on it on my next and final slide, is that we really need to avoid, when we do have trustees with lived experience, labeling them. So I've seen sometimes, for example, service user trustee, and it's a similar thing, you know, when you're on a board and for example, you're a finance person, and you sit there through most of the board meeting until it comes to the finance bit, and then you see the 3 finance people sit up and take notice, and when it moves on to something else, they go down again. We call that staying in lane. So you just focus on your area of expertise, and then you sit back again. We don't like that. We like trustees who are generalists, who have broadened their knowledge and their experience. And you can't have, one trustee with lived experience who is meant to represent everyone. Just doesn't work like that. If you're a person living with cancer, for example, your voice can't possibly represent the voice of everyone living with cancer in a conversation. But you can only represent your own voice. And to see a person living with cancer as a trustee as being only a trustee living with cancer and not bringing all of their other experiences in the room is also a mistake. So that's really what my final slide is about. It's about thinking about on a board, learning from each other, from all experiences, from your learned experience, those things that you learn as you go through life, but also your lived experience. And I'm showing that here. Really, there are some general experiences that are very important, which we must bring to decision making. And there are also some specific ones that, of course, are important to have specific learned experiences on boards, like legal and financial and clinical. But equally, the lived experience of the cause, of the social issue, of the community, those things are important too. But just seeing someone as only bringing their lived experience, I think is a mistake, because everybody has got both lived and learned experiences. And just one final example of that, I have a colleague, Atul Patel, who 20 years ago, we were having a conversation about diversity. And he said, why does everybody always look at me when they're talking about diversity? He brings other things, and we also, each of us, are able to talk about diversity. So my final message here is that we would encourage you to take positive steps to share all of your experiences, lived and learn from each other. That's my final slide. I'm going to stop sharing and come back to everyone. Now, this next session is, I think, the most exciting bit of the day, because we've now got three, I'm calling them case studies loosely, but just three of your colleagues who have got experience of bringing trustees with lived experience onto their board, and experience as trustees with lived experience. And we've asked them to share some of their rationale. We've asked them to share some of their own experience in doing this. And so it's a huge value. We're going to hear from Shruti first. And what I'm going to do after Shruti's had her slot, before we then go on to Megan and then to Michael, I'm just going to give you just a few minutes just to record some of your thoughts in chat. So do reflect on what in a second Shruti is saying, and be ready to think about, to relate what she's saying to your world, to your board, to your organisation, and we'll see what the exploration brings. So Shruti, I'm over to you for 5 minutes or so.
Okay, thanks Caroline, and thanks to SCVO for having me on the panel this evening. It's a pleasure to join you and the other panelists as well. I am representing an organisation called Sahelia, and we were set up in 1992, and we exist as a specialist organisation to support the mental well-being of minority, ethnic, asylum seeker and refugee women and girls. So we're based in Edinburgh, Glasgow and other parts of Scotland, and each year we support over 1,100 women from 51 countries who've experienced mental health problems as a result of abuse, violence, torture and discrimination. In 2020, our turnover was 1.3 million. So I became a director for Sahelia in 2016 and have been chairwoman since 2018. And we've had women with lived experience sitting on our board for all that time, and even before then as well. But we don't use the phrase lived experience, we use the term experts or just directors or trustees. All my directors have direct knowledge and experience of the issues we work to. All my directors are women, and all my directors are women from an ethnic minority, refugee or asylum seeking community in Scotland. So we all know what it means to be Black or brown in our society and deal with the intersectional and cumulative impacts of the disadvantages that are linked to the combination of race and gender. So we're 100% representative of the women we support. So we are 100% lived experience on our board of directors. So this is really important for us as an organisation. Having 100% representation and lived experience is essential. We provide a highly specialist support service at Sahelia, and all my directors have an in-depth understanding of the additional and specific challenges ethnic minority women face living in Scotland. My directors are drawn from a wide range of backgrounds and specialisms, and we recruit individuals for everything they have to offer as an individual and as a director, so not just for their lived experience, but for their professional expertise as well. So I consider all of their knowledge, all of their skills and all of their expertise, not just their lived experience, but together we have the collective knowledge for helping women and girls, which is rooted in professional expertise in service delivery and also that personal understanding of some of the community issues. As I said, my directors are in tune with the needs of our services, and this has helped us develop a successful organisation and successful services, which allows us to better serve our communities. As well as some professional expertise, they also have the real on-the-ground knowledge of the work the organisation is doing, and that's from the perspective of individuals and communities. When women and girls see or hear about Sahelia and our board, it assures them. It helps us to build trust with our service users, and it gives them confidence in us, that decisions are being made by the right people and in the right way. They see people like themselves and they think they will understand us. It also helps us secure our reputation with partners, funders and donors. So over the last 18 months, 2 years, we've obviously seen a bigger focus on Black and brown communities and seeking to meet their needs as a result of Black Lives Matter and COVID. So we've found that having a 100% lived experience and representative board has increased our credibility and our authenticity with partners and funders and donors. So we really are the experts in tackling and addressing the mental health needs of ethnic minority women in Scotland. So you've probably already realised that lived experience isn't an optional add-on for us. It never really has been. And we've been bold in our commitment to that 100% representation. And we did it because it's not just about insight and perspective, it's also about power. So we've shared power by ensuring that experts are embedded into the composition of the board itself. So with all of the rights, all of the responsibilities and power that board membership and being a director brings, you know, I was really keen that we wanted to live up to our vision of a fully inclusive Scotland where women are active citizens, they're socially engaged and they're economically integrated. So I want all of our women, including our directors, to succeed socially and economically, and I want to see them go on to contribute in similar roles elsewhere. So it's been essential for us to have that lived experience and representation at the table. And when we talk about the issues that we talk about, we found that not having to deal with whiteness around the table has been brilliant. So we can move beyond the need to improve racial literacy to deal directly with the issues. And also our directors don't feel intimidated or undermined because of the colour of their skin, their background or their religion. And they don't have to be subject to discrimination, racial discrimination, or even gender bias. So I work, you know, we work within a safe space where women, as women of colour, they can come together, they can share their views, and their voice will be heard. So for a charity like Sahelia, it's essential that lived experience is at the table because they're the experts fundamentally. Thanks.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting. I can see people putting questions in the Q&A, and we're gonna save those up until the final session, which Tracy's going to run. What I would love all of you to do now, inspired by what Shruti has just talked about, is think about the value that lived experience trustees could bring to your organisation. So inspired by that, I noted down, I think it was 8 different separate benefits that lived experience trustees bring to Shruti's organisation. I want you to apply that to yourselves now, to your organisation, and just note down in chat for us, just briefly, note down in chat for us what benefits this could bring to you, and indeed already bring to you if you have trustees with lived experience on your board. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to do that before we go to Megan for another inspiration.
Thanks, Caroline. That's big.
Megan, if you just give us just a second, I'm hoping that people will put stuff down in chat and just note down some benefits for them before you start talking. I quite like just to see if anybody's going to. They're not at the moment. So I don't know whether, you see, if you were to start talking, then they definitely won't. So if you just hang on just for a second, just to see if we can inspire people to, we're getting it now. So people are just having a think, and we're already getting some of our audience's ideas about how having trustees with lived experience on their board will bring extra benefit. We're getting better understanding in how to reach the community that you serve. We get understanding of issues faced. We've got greater insight and awareness. We've got representation, really strong, powerful message there from Shruti, which Laura is reinforced thinking for Laura. Breadth, Peter is saying, and as a DPO, we've got Leo's board is predominantly composed of people with lived experience and can see absolutely the benefits. So we're already seeing quite a lot of issues of benefits and value add from it. We're going to go to Megan now. I've got a bit of a head of steam in the chat now, Megan, so I'm happy that we can add a layer of your thinking, and that will add extra thoughts that people have. The reason I'm wanting your thoughts is that is audience thoughts in here, is that that adds to all of our combined learning on the topic. So Megan, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. So I guess when I was asked about my kind of thoughts of lived experience on the board, I thought about when I was first asked to join the board of Who Cares Scotland. So we are a national charity that work with children, young people and adults who have experience of the care system as a child. A lot of what we do is individual advocacy, helping young people have their voices heard in children's hearing system panels, in meetings with their schools, raising issues with social workers like that they want to see their brothers and sisters more. That kind of thing is a lot of what we do. And then we also do collective advocacy, which is more about campaigning, about influencing, about changing policy and law. So that's kind of where I was. I was 15 when I got involved with Who Cares Scotland. I was living in a children's residential unit up in the Highlands. I had advocacy from Who Cares Scotland, and I started to get involved a bit more in the kind of other offers that they had and what was actually going on. And as I met more and more care experienced young people, I realised, oh, that's happened to you, that's happened to me too. Oh, that's not just a kind of one-off accident, that's actually an issue that happens across the country. It's not just my area, it's not just my house. These are issues that are affecting all of us. So I started to get a bit more involved, started to realise that actually there was stuff here that needed to change. And then they had to check this with Oscar because they weren't sure what the legal age of a trustee had to be in Scotland. It's 16, by the way, it's not 18. So I joined the board when I was 17. And I remember the first board meeting I went to, it was the annual accounts. And oh my God, like I was sitting with my highlighters, I was trying to follow it with my finger. I was really confused, but it's okay. I was sitting beside Anna Fowley, it was really helpful. So, you know, it was absolutely okay for me to go, sorry, wait a minute, I've got a bit confused, can we slow down? What is that? You know, Anna would point it out to me and I go, right, okay, that makes sense. And they go, don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. And it took a couple of years, but I did get the hang of it. There are other board meetings where it's, you know, the CEO is coming and saying, we want to launch a new campaign on restraint. And Anna Fowley, for all of her expertise, has never lived in a children's home where there are adults kind of pinning you down and restraining you for what they say is your own safety. She doesn't have, she felt like she wasn't informed to kind of have a view on that as much as I was when this is what happens in my house every day. So going back to kind of what Caroline's lived learning skills thing, it's we were learning from each other, and I think that was really important. It was really, I think, being in care, like as a young person, while being on the board, I had a very different perspective from a lot of them. So I remember the 2014 Children and Young People Act. Who Cares Scotland did a lot of campaigning around that. We raised the age of leaving care, we got corporate parenting into the law. They were celebrating, and I remember going to a board meeting and getting told by the CEO how brilliant this was. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because the reality is that we're all still leaving at 16. Like, as a young person about to leave care, I haven't been told about any of this. It was very different from kind of the reality of what was actually happening for people on the ground that the charity was aiming to help, and what they kind of saw as like an achievement, right? Tick, that's achieved. It was a completely different perspective that you wouldn't have otherwise had. So yeah, I guess, you know, the perspective Who Cares Scotland used to work with a lot of young people that were kind of under 25. It's kind of our kind of unofficial limits. Having older trustees on the board and having older trustees involved with us, sorry, I don't know if you can hear that, that's my puppy scraping the door, is we started to realise that there's actually a lifelong impact of care. We're now working with people of all ages, and we're challenging government to start supporting care experienced people of all ages. But that wouldn't have come about if we hadn't have had those older trustees, because there wasn't the opportunity otherwise for us to kind of get them engaged in the kind of typical youth work activities and such like that we were doing. So yeah, as a trustee with lived experience, I'm much more connected to the community. I'm much more aware of what they want and how things are actually going for them, and I can better represent their views at this level. You know, if we say that we're here for the care experience community and we're wanting to speak up for the care experience community, it should be the care experience community that are speaking. You know, we all need these finance people, these legal people, but as we've grown and as we've got better at supporting people with lived experience to join our boards, actually where we are now is that we have a big board. About 8 or 9 of our trustees have lived experience, but they're also all lawyers or educational psychologists or accountants, another lawyer, like directors of social work, civil servants. When we recruit now, we kind of automatically will give an interview to anyone who meets the essential criteria and has lived experience. But then we're also looking for, and what else can you bring? It shouldn't be tokenistic. There are things you can do to support people, put the training in place. You could try some like mentoring, like Anna did for me when I was quite young. Make sure it's respectful, make sure it's accessible for people. If that means, you know, making sure that people understand that of course you're going to pay their travel expenses, or what else do you need to kind of help yourself get settled in life. So for me, I was accessing advocacy from our charity at the same time as being on a board. It didn't, and not having my shit together at 17 didn't mean that I couldn't give a valuable contribution to our board. Actually, it was more helpful because I was right in the middle of it rather than having left care 20 years ago. But yeah, asking, putting all of that in place, offering people with lived experience the opportunity because they have the lived experience, but then also asking what else do you bring so that it's not tokenistic is really important for us. And that's where we are now, so that our chair and our vice chair, we both have care experience. You know, experience of fundraising is important, but so is the experience of the cause that you're working for. You know, I can't imagine like that Macmillan wouldn't be improved by having someone who's had cancer in their strategic decision making. I can't imagine that, you know, the National Advisory Council of Women and Girls would have a man sitting on it. It doesn't make sense that you would have kind of the Scottish Refugee Council or Who Cares Scotland or other organisations like that you wouldn't have lived experience on their boards, because otherwise you're missing out such a huge part of knowledge and understanding. I think Tracy had said earlier, it's about skills and experience and backgrounds that you want diversity in, but it's also knowledge and understanding that you just can't get unless that's been your life, unless that's been normal for you. I'm just having a look at my notes because I've gone a bit wiggly. And
you probably will take a look at your notes, but you probably will be able to bring in more in response to the questions towards the end. Megan, was there anything striking that?
Yeah, just the last thing that I've got is that it's actually also a brilliant quality control. You know, I kind of it's really great to get reports that say 87% of young people rated us as excellent or whatever, but also I know that because I've worked with them myself, I've had advocacy. So yeah, get your service users or the people that you're working for or the community that you're trying to serve involved at every level, because otherwise you're not amplifying their voice, you're just speaking for them.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really fabulous. And I have never heard in all the case studies I've read and listened to, brilliant quality control. So I love that. I think that's absolute. I adore it so much. I'm going to ask you to do a case study for us on brilliant quality control for our web resource. I'm sure you're all inspired by that. Thank you so much, Megan. What I'd like you to do now is just take 1 or 2 minutes just to note down in chat any more thoughts you've had about relating what Megan has just said to your organisation. I'm really interested in what Megan made me think about was barriers to doing it, but also enablers, things that are difficult and challenging if you want to have trustees with lived experience on your board, but also things that make it work well. So maybe some thoughts on that, if you would, in chat. Just again, how you've been inspired by Megan, and also what that's made you think about you need to have in place to make it work. And she talked about making training accessible, having buddies, having mentors, that kind of thing. So do just take a minute or two before we come finally to Michael to just to add your thoughts to chat.
And just even like to kind of reiterate that point, Caroline, like when COVID happened, I didn't have a device that I could join Zoom on. Nothing worked with a camera, so they had to get me this laptop, and it wasn't something that we necessarily would have thought about. But you know, if you are kind of working with a homelessness charity or poverty, like just be aware that there are actually very practical barriers to that as well.
Yes. So practical barriers, cultural barriers, you know, our unconscious bias and all that stuff. There are huge numbers of them, but the practical ones, but boy, can we tackle them. Absolutely. Thank you. So any more thoughts from anyone? Certainly it's making people think about barriers. We're being thanked for your leadership, Megan. Lovely, thank you. Well, what we'll do now is we'll turn, thanks Megan, we'll turn to Michael and have our final layer of expertise and perspective for this session. Michael, close off our case studies, and once Michael has spoken, I'm just going to give you a minute or two again just to put your thoughts down if any occur to you as he's talking, and also start to think about questions that you're going to have for the panel towards the end. Michael, thank you.
Yeah, there's so much to take from that. I wonder what I can add, but I think myself, I was a trustee of a water charity just a drop until June. So I had some experience of what it was like to be on a board, wrestling with some of these issues in the past. So when it came to myself establishing a new charity, I think the opportunity and the challenge was I could start off something and think about how to be more reflective and inclusive. So basically at the beginning of this year, I was aware that I'd been helping out some charities in some ways after the pandemic. I was thinking about what else we could possibly do, becoming a bit more angry with what's going on with the second wave of COVID-19. And at that stage, I realized that after some Googling and some research that there wasn't a charity at that time set up for the UK to help everybody significantly supported by COVID-19. I think there's some reasons for that. It's hard to start a charity when there's a pandemic because there's so much uncertainty. And also there's a lot of great charities, the NHS, social sector groups that had pivoted to try and support people at such a difficult and challenging time. But with the recognition that there's going to be a long-term need for physical, psychological support across a range of issues, it felt like there was a need to have a charity that's kind of broader in scope. From my own background, I was really keen on the idea that what we could be was not a charity that does everything, but very much a supportive platform. So we can be a charity that points to the right places for support. It's not about us providing everything ourselves. And so through that, we've been more inclusive. And I was thinking throughout the kind of process of building up a board about how we can try and flatten the dynamic between people that are being supported and the supporters. Because it's something that I'd experienced in the past and been slightly uncomfortable with, was that idea that there was an us and them sort of dynamic. So basically when I started to look at recruiting trustees, I managed to get some really great pro bono support from a recruitment company, Oxford HR. And luckily, their person who was kind of mainly helping me, Sarah, was really keen on this side as well. So we could look at the diversity of issues that were facing people and think about how we could make sure we were reflective of that. I think there's some benefits that you have to starting a charity during pandemic, and that we are wholly digital. So that meant that we could not need to think so much about geography, some of those other factors as well, in terms of trying to get the right people in the right places. As we built up the board, then I think what we're able to do is try and make sure it's really complicated, because obviously there's so many issues related to the COVID-19 that to be truly reflective is in a sense impossible, but we could try and be as reflective as possible as we are doing things. But I was also keen, especially from talking to grassroots groups who've been assisting in issues such as long COVID and grief and bereavement and other issues, that we could ensure that we not only got people lived experience and expertise, I think like Shruti was saying about that being kind of one and the same thing, but we could also find additional methods for getting people. So as we were establishing the trustee board, I also established an expert panel, and that included people with expertise, but also lived experience. I wanted to be sure that I could be answerable to them. So that say if we have a group such as Long COVID SOS, we could have somebody from them on that expert panel. So they might not have had the time to be part of the trustee board, but it meant that they could then provide oversight. I can then share what we're doing with them and then make sure we can get any feedback. It's the same with the volunteers as well. I was thinking about how we can be answerable to them, that sort of perspective. So actually at 6 o'clock, so in about 20 minutes, I've got the latest monthly update, and we've now kind of flattened that. So the monthly update is myself with all the trustees, volunteers, ambassadors. We basically go through what we've been up to over the month and then kind of answer any questions that they have, speak through any issues, any opportunities that they think they have as well. So I think through that process, then I'm very aware, and especially being in this meeting as well, that I think we've got a really great board in terms of diversity compared to a lot of other organizations. But I think there's definitely a way that we can go with that as well at the same time. And when I'm speaking to other charities and organizations as part of COVID aid, you're then coming across different types of groups who are not being as represented on the board as they should be. So it's something that I'm always thinking about, how we can then make sure we're more representative. I think the guiding panel, the expert panel we have, is always a good opportunity for that as well, because it means that we can, in a sense, more quickly add people than sometimes it takes through the trustee process. It means that we can also have a kind of broader panel in that sense as well. And then with the board, we can always be kind of reflective of that, look at where we're kind of lacking that sort of diversity in terms of expertise, experience, the different demographics, and try and include that as well. So yeah, it's definitely a work in progress. I think that the benefits to it have been, absolutely massive. And I think that's what everybody was speaking about earlier in terms of the input, in terms of guidance, in terms of perspectives that I can possibly have. And it's also about the idea that I want us as a charity to be a community in how we operate. So I think definitely being able to then empower people who are involved at every sort of level to then take things and run with them as well, and feel like they've got the responsibility to be able to do that. So yeah, that's some of my thoughts on that so far. Obviously I could speak more about any of those issues.
Michael, thank you so much. That was really interesting. I haven't heard the term flatten the us and them dynamic, and I really like that. And I think I'm putting together quite a lot of what you said, with what Megan has said, and also with what Shruti has said around power. I think it's really interesting. I think we could do, I mean we, Centre for Charity Effectiveness at the business school where I work, could do more around thinking about power and power dynamics, just inspired by what you've just said. Thank you. So just over to the audience now, in terms of your thoughts inspired by what Michael has just said, just for a minute. And if you can multitask, that's another trustee capability and competency. You can multitask, as well as putting some ideas, excuse me, about what Michael has inspired you to think about in relation to your organisation and your practice. Also start to think, if you would, about questions that you want to ask the panel, because in a couple of minutes we'll go back to Tracy, and she's going to handle the last 10 minutes or so of Q&A. So your thoughts in chat first, if you would, about you relating what has just been said to your organisation, particularly around how you do it, you know, how you address the power dynamic, how you flatten the us and them dynamic, how you reflect the diversity of issues that your organisation faces. Just a few more seconds. I can see people already switching to ask questions. You can do a bit of both. If you can shimmy from chat into Q&A, that would be fabulous. A skill we've all developed in the course of the last 18 months. Yeah, Tracy's saying here that isn't it wonderful to hear from somebody who had a blank sheet of paper and could design this from scratch? Most of us, don't we, have to deal with changing something that exists, which is really interesting. As you switch your thoughts from what Michael has said into more generally, now, if you would, questions for the panel. We've got 2 or 3 or 4. Tracy, I might just shut up now and hand back to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Caroline. Some really inspiring speakers there. Thank you for that. Got a question very early on from Owen, and he works in the gambling sector. And whilst many organisations such as the Gambling Regulator and Gambling Commissioner of Research, Education and Treatment are just beginning to look at ways in involving people with lived experience of gambling, there's actually little representation of people on actual boards. So he's wondering, how can he campaign, advocate for wider representation of lived experience? Obviously, you've said this is all in its infancy, Caroline, but do any of the panel have any kind of tips on how, you know, we can raise the profile of the importance of this on boards?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the importance of it, I think it's very much about being able to reach the audience that you're looking to support through that charity. And I think if you're, again, if you don't have direct experience of that, then I think you're very much at risk of doing things which are ineffective. So I think there's the, you know, there's the moral, emotional case. So there's many other reasons for doing it. I think if you need to, there's also just the kind of rational, from a perspective, if you want to do good as a charity, then you want to make sure that what you're doing is going to be found and then accessed as you know, tailored as possible. And I think you're going to struggle to do that if you don't bring in people and make sure that they feel as empowered as possible to speak about their experiences and about what will work.
Sorry, Shruti, you go for it.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely right. Obviously, to advocate for lived experience on board, and I would advocate for that rather than having lived experience research being conducted. And again, that goes back to the power play and the flattening of us and them. So if you have lived experience at the start of conversations, that means that people on the lived experience is part of the process. And, you know, that's something that obviously we've done at Sahelia as well. And that's absolutely required for the systems change, you know, that's required, you know, for communities to be involved at the start of shaping the agenda, and rather than just being brought in to kind of share their lived experience. So I think that's kind of where the dialogue is taking place right now in terms of, you know, the recovery from COVID and the fact that communities and third sectors have picked up a lot, you know, the brunt of what was required to kind of meet some of the response. But absolutely, you know, rather than advocating for lived experience research, lived experience needs to be at the table, so it can be absolutely at the start of discussions. That's all I want to say on that. Yeah,
I was just going to add, Shruti, thank you. I was just going to add, play them this recording frankly. I mean, anybody that you want to, because in here you've got 3 excuse me, fabulous examples of the benefits of lived experience on charity boards. How could they not listen to this and be persuaded?
Thank you. James has come in with, he's wondering if the panel can speak a bit more about intersectionality of lived experience and other experience. So, for example, Megan joined the board at age 17 and brought her experience of care, but she was also a young trustee. So, you know, what do you think about that? You know, you're not just bringing the lived experience of the charity's cause, there's other things, and how do you bring your full self to benefit the board? Megan, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I saw this question in the Q&A. I'm not quite sure. Can you phrase that a different way, Tracy?
I think it was just, obviously, do you think you are on the board of Who Cares because of the lived experience of care, or do you think they wanted a young trustee as well? You know, I mean, we obviously want to get away from tick boxing and all of that, but it's about bringing your full self and everything that you experience, isn't it, onto a board?
Yeah, no, I mean, age isn't something we really look at. So like when I joined, I was the youngest. I'm 23 now and I'm still the youngest. So yeah, I think it's more about, do you meet the essential skills and criteria? Do you want to do this? Are you capable to do this? Age shouldn't really matter. It definitely, sometimes I have different perspectives on people. Like I've pushed for some kind of gender equality policies and like improving our like LGBT kind of allyship as a charity. Maybe older board members might not have thought to put that on the agenda. It's definitely important, like the way we use social media has changed, but it's not something we kind of like strictly look at.
Caroline, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think all I'd say is I think all 3 speakers have reinforced the importance of seeing the whole person with their lived and learned experiences. And I think it was Michael that talked particularly about, you know, in recruitment, you know, who you look for in recruitment, and have some minimums, some sort of minimum criteria, and then look at skill sets. I think it would, you know, we definitely, I don't think, should see people through just one lens, and we should use development. I mean, there's a question here from Hugh that I've seen about buddies and mentors, and he says that also smacks of patronizing. I'd love to hear from the panel about how you can mentor someone and ensure that it doesn't feel patronizing, because I've seen mentoring work really well to help bring out things that in me, for example, that would never have come out on their own, so to speak.
So we've tried this. Sorry, Shruti. We tried it. I think when I first started, there was quite a lot of us that were younger, and we tried to quite formally sort of go you and you, you and you, you and you, and it didn't really work. People didn't really proactively do it. Like it was, you know, oh, are we going to meet up before the meeting? I don't really know. Am I supposed to? It was a bit awkward, a bit weird. But we've also got one board member in particular who is an absolutely brilliant mentor, and kind of like mother hen almost type figure to all of us that have care experience. And she just does that because that's the sort of person she is. She wants to kind of check in on you. How are you doing? Are you keeping up with uni? What did you think of that paper we got the other week? And that's kind of encouraged because it's meaningful. It's an actual relationship. She actually cares about you. I would say encourage that rather than try to make it a kind of pure formal, like almost like an appraisal type setup.
Yeah, I'll Megan. So we recruit directors in 3 ways. So we'll do an open recruitment. We'll put it out quite publicly on social media. So that's Twitter and Facebook. And we ask quite publicly to a job description for directors, and we circulate that to our networks as well. And then we also use our own networks, and we approach individuals who might have worked for the organisation or who we have worked with in partnership. And we, you know, I might have a conversation with them as a chair just to explore if they might be interested in becoming a director for Sahelia, or one of the other directors might do the same. And then the third way we kind of tend to recruit trustees is from, we have a progression pathway. So service users who've come into the charity and have gone through different programs, and they end up becoming champions for change. So this is when they've, you know, dealt with their own kind of mental health issues. They've learned a little bit more English. They're kind of a bit more integrated in society. And we've you know, been working with them to gauge their interest and to get them onto the board. So we now have 3 champions, ex-champions for change on our board, and the fresh perspective they bring is absolutely brilliant. But there is work that needs to be done to explain to them what the role of a director is, and what the role of a trustee is. But that isn't just for those particular individuals. I'd say it's for all directors and trustees. So we constantly have to remind individuals what their roles and responsibilities are. So we do lots of refresher training alongside, you know, training on safeguarding and things like that. And we do lots of information sessions with senior managers in the charity, so they can get to know a bit more about what the organisation does, and they can become familiar with our work, so they can be good advocates on behalf of the charity as well. And you know, I do spend, you know, a bit of time with each of the directors, particularly the newer ones, just to find out how they feel in their role. Do they feel that they have enough information? Do they feel that they're able to contribute to meetings? Is that because I'm running the meetings in a certain way, or is it because they don't feel confident? So there is that kind of informal mentoring relationship that I've developed with each of the individuals, and that seems to be working quite well. It does mean that, you know, you are constantly working on the board and developing the board and developing the individuals. But again, if I go back to something that I said earlier on, in that we want to be true to our vision, which is to support women on their journey and to be able to contribute, you know, economically and integrate in society. So by helping them to realize and achieve their full potential as directors, then that's part of what we're doing there. But, you know, and we do have check-ins, and, you know, one will say, I can't do this, this is not for me. And then I'll say, well, you know, why isn't it for you? We'll explore it. We'll come up with a bit more training, or we'll have a few more conversations, or maybe run the board meeting in a different way. And most often than not, they stay. And if it really isn't for them, then it's a mutual recognition, you know, like awareness, like actually this isn't working, so I'll kind of step down as well. But I think that's part of building a team. And getting to work together as a team, and constantly just refreshing what the role of a director is. I think that's really important. Thanks,
Shruti. Part of that answer has actually answered a couple of questions that, unfortunately, we're running out of time. We won't have time, but it was round about, somebody was asking about having a service user, somebody with learning disabilities, getting them onto the board. The pressure of them handling the responsibilities, the pressure of the role. But what you said, you know, as a chair, you know, you can put things in place to support them. And similarly with somebody, they're working with service users that are just going through bereavement. So wondering, you know, when can you ask if they would be interested in joining the board? So thanks for that. There's some great stuff coming in, but unfortunately, we are running out of time. Caroline, do you want to just sum things up before I finish up?
I think all I would say is, as I answered to another question, I think there is a huge amount of value from what people have said, both you in chat and particularly the 3 panelists, that promotes and reinforces the positive benefits to all organisations of having trustees with lived experience on the board, and for not being tokenistic and for not labelling, but to think about the whole person. So use this recording to persuade more people is all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. That's great. Well, it just remains for me to thank all of our panelists for their contributions, and to Caroline. I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and I hope you've all been inspired to look at how to diversify your board and consider how to include trustees with lived experience. As Caroline said, we will be sending out the chat, so you'll get people's views on this. And before we draw to a close, I've got a quick question, one more for you all. I'd just like you to put in the chat, what one action will you take to improve trustee recruitment and board diversity in your organisation after this webinar? And I'd really appreciate it if you could do that. As I said, today's session is part of a week-long programme of events to celebrate Trustees Week. And if you've missed what we've done so far, you can catch up on the recordings via our website. And we do have another 2 webinars tomorrow, looking at what trustees themselves can do to increase diversity on their boards, and also how digital tools can help make your board more inclusive. So you can find details of all of these on our website, and I hope you'll be able to join us. And do remember, if you're an existing trustee, then we have a SCVO trustee network you can join. And thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of Trustees Week, and goodbye. Thanks.